All right, everybody. Today what we're going to be talking about in our new unit is foreign policy. And before you can really talk about foreign policy, you have to understand what's going on during the United States during this time period. And the time period that we're really talking about is the 1890s, roughly until 1910. And at that time period, you've got industrialization. So the United States is developing, cities are growing, urbanization, immigration. You have massive numbers of European and Asian immigrants that are coming into the United States. And the progressive movement. You have a large group of individuals that are trying to make things better. And foreign policy is how a country decides to interact with the rest of the world. So your foreign policy is basically an attitude that your country picks. If your country decides to be very aggressive, that's your foreign policy. You have an aggressive foreign policy. You decide to be very friendly and very nice. That is the behavior that your country has chosen. Today I'm going to talk about 3 foreign policies that the United States kind of rotated through during our time period. So the very first foreign policy that I'm going to talk about is isolationism. If you are an isolationist country, your country believes that you should not get involved in other countries' affairs. You don't want any enemies, but at the same time, you do not want any friends. An example of an isolated country is a country like Switzerland. They don't have any enemies, but at the same time, they don't have many allies. They've chosen to specifically not get involved in world wars like World War I and World War II because they didn't want friends or enemies. They wanted to be involved in nobody else's problems. So isolationism is not getting involved in other countries' affairs. And as a country, we started off with this policy beginning in the 1700s. So right as soon as we became a country, as soon as we became the United States of America, we were isolationist. And we were isolationist because George Washington told us to be. He was afraid that if we decided to make a lot of treaties and get a lot of allies, then Europe would basically take advantage of us and try to recolonize us and force us to being back to those 13 colonies. And he does not want that. So the thing to remember is this lonely little big-eared dog who just wants to be by themselves. And remember, at any point in time, you can pause this recording so that you can take your notes and adjust whatever you need to on your paper. The second foreign policy that we have is expansionism. Now, we transition from isolationism to expansionism in the 1800s, and we really start with this after the Civil War. And expansionism, a little bit before, I guess you could argue, with the Mexican-American War. But either way, expansionism is the idea that a country wants to expand its boundaries. They want to grow. They want to be bigger. And typically there are 4 reasons for this. Make sure you write this down on your note sheet. The why for expansionism is typically, not always, but land. Countries need land, whether that be for natural resources, whether that be for the land itself. Maybe you've got a lot of farming or a large population to sustain, so you need a lot of crops. Adventure, you're bored, why not? Gold, countries a lot of times will expand to other areas of the world if they learn that they have a resource like gold, or in the modern day, oil has become a lot of something that countries will expand. They'll gobble up other areas around them to try to take that gold or to try to take that oil. But for our time period, we're talking about gold. And then lastly, God. And I say God because in the late 1800s, a lot of European and Christian countries predominantly used religion as an excuse to expand into Africa and Asia. And what I mean by that is a lot of missionaries went into those areas saying, we need to take over India, we need to take over countries in Africa, we need to take over China, because they don't have Christianity there, and by taking them over, we can spread Christianity. So expansionism, again, is wanting to expand boundaries. By the 1800s, we as a country have transitioned from isolationism to expansionism, not so much because of land, but really because of gold and adventure. We want to be seen as competitors with Europe. We want to be seen as their equals. And so when they start gobbling up land, it kind of becomes, well, maybe we should do the exact same thing. So land, gold, God a little bit, but money definitely is a motivating factor. God is more with the European Christian countries. And then lastly is something that we still deal with today, which is a foreign policy called imperialism. Imperialism is when a country attempts to control weaker countries or smaller countries and have influence over them. And the idea is whether you're gobbling them up or whether you're just controlling them and letting them be independent, the idea is you want to take advantage of two things, and this is really important that you write this down. You want to take advantage of their materials, so you want to use their natural resources or maybe their population as a workforce. Regardless, you want to gobble up materials that they have that you don't, or markets. For the United States, we were producing a lot of things in the early 1900s. If you remember those factories, the assembly lines, eventually you can only make so many cars before people don't need to buy them. And with the assembly line, somebody like Ford is making cars so quickly and so cheaply that Americans just don't need them anymore. Everybody has a car. They don't need to keep buying them. And so what you get with imperialism is if we can kind of influence or take over other countries, then those people can start buying those cars and they can start buying American products that maybe we don't necessarily need or are wanting to buy. So the big thing with imperialism is you're trying to control or take advantage of countries to take their resources, whether cheaply or freely, and to use them as a market, to force them to buy your stuff. And sometimes it's not so much forcing as it is they want to because they're influenced by you. We switched to this in the early 1900s. Really 1900, 1898 is when we switch to imperialism, where we start to try to control smaller or weaker countries around us. And that would be the mean dog. At this point, you need to have your chart completely filled out. If you don't, go ahead and skip back, rewind, start from the beginning, what have you, until your chart is totally filled out. But by the end of this video, you need to completely understand isolationism, which is being by yourself. That's right here. Expansionism, which is wanting to gobble up other countries around you to expand your boundaries and make sure you get the why. And imperialism. And remember with imperialism and expansionism kind of go hand in hand, but remember with imperialism, you don't necessarily have to control a country. You don't have to take them over and make them a part of your country. It's really controlling them through influence. There was the bell. It's controlling them through influence. So they're still an independent country, but you are so influential that they kind of are willing to do whatever you want. All right, make sure you get the other things on your checklist done and enjoy your day. Oops.